Good afternoon, everyone, and also good morning, good evening for those of you who joined from a bit further afield. So we've got some really great companies on today from all over the globe. So I'd like to thank you all for taking the time out to join us today on this, what is a joint Turnkey and SailPoint webinar, where what we'll be focusing on is the topic of identity and access management within the pharma sector. So this webinar, essentially, it's born out of, it's got an accompanying report that is available at the Turnkey website. You should have been provided with the link as part of the invite, but if you haven't received this, then please do let us know. I'm Chris Boyle, Director of Identity and Access Management at Turnkey Consulting, and I'll be your host for this session. By the way of a brief introduction of myself and of Turnkey, I've been in identity and access management for about 20 years. I've been responsible for delivering large implementations of IAM across multiple platforms, including SailPoint, and across many sectors, one of which is pharmaceuticals. For those of you unfamiliar with Turnkey, we provide advisory, implementation, and managed services from our 7 global locations, and we do that across identity, cybersecurity, risk management, and SAP. We do work with lots of FTSE 100 companies. We also provide services across a number of pharma clients globally, and our team have got years of experience understanding the unique challenges within this sector. As I mentioned, we also work across many other sectors, so it's useful to see the challenges in pharma align with the types of businesses, especially around operational technology or OT, and how these challenges can be and are addressed in other areas outside pharma, and how some of the solutions that we've put together can be adapted to work with the unique challenges of the pharma sector. So I'm joined today by Paul Squires, the lead strategist for SailPoint in the UK and Ireland. Paul, do you want to give a brief introduction?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. So for those of you who aren't familiar, SailPoint provide identity security solutions, and we're a leader of in that particular space. And we'll get later on in the webinar about what that actually means and the types of things that we do. But broadly speaking, it's focused around making sure that users have the right access to do their jobs, and no more than that and no less. We have a long history of working with lots of different types of organizations, but particularly complex organizations with heavy regulatory requirements. And as you would expect then, with thousands of customers across the globe, quite a number of those already in the pharmaceutical sector. For myself, I've also been in identity for about 20 years, really focused around these ideas around governance, compliance, and how we can leverage identity to achieve real business goals. And that's my focus, is thinking about how this is not just a technology problem, but the why and the how, not necessarily just that individual piece of technology, are very much focused on trying to make this as simple as possible so that people can get true value from our solutions. Thanks, Chris.
Perfect. Thanks, Paul. So just skip to the next slide. So today what we're going to talk about is really sort of why agility and security can not be mutually exclusive in the pharma sector, how the threat landscape is increasing with the rapid growth of innovation, and what some of the risks are that are unique to the pharma sector, and also how some of these can be mitigated as well. We'll also touch upon a brief introduction into IGA, Identity Governance and Administration, IGA as it's known, and the benefits that can bring, and some of the challenges that can be solved. But just before we get into it, there's a little bit of housekeeping. Just to let everybody know, we're trying to keep the webinar to around the 30-minute mark. So if you do have any questions, please use the Q&A or the chat tab, and we'll try to answer them at the end. Or if we run out of time, we can take those offline and we can respond later. Additionally, please note that this session is being recorded and it can be provided offline later. Cool. So with that said, let's get started. So, Paul, why do you think that agility and security are essential in this sector?
So I think there's a number of factors, and obviously some of these on the screen, but the primary thing that I think we see across the pharmaceutical sector generally is that level of high regulation that is applicable. I think something to bear in mind, and I guess we'll get into some of the details around this as we go through the discussion. But fundamentally, there's a whole range of regulatory compliance requirements for all sorts of industries, and treating that as a baseline. When we look at the pharmaceutical sector, they have to comply with all of those other relevant, maybe national type things, something such as GDPR, Sarbanes-Oxley, and things such as obviously the upcoming UK Sarbanes-Oxley equivalent, which we're expecting over the next year or so. So with that as a baseline, organizations operating in pharmaceutical then have a bunch of other things to comply with as well. And we see that makes the landscape more difficult to operate in, and starts to have a bunch of effects around how access is granted to users, how that is managed, and how that is going to be then used as evidence around those regulations. So I think from an industry specific thing, we've obviously got things like GXP and some similar things around that as well.
Yeah, cool. And you make a good point, especially around the sort of the GXP regulations. So, when we've experienced helping clients, deliver some of these technologies and solutions and business outcomes, there's the GXP regulation, which actually adds a lot of additional kind of documentation and paperwork and controls that that have to be addressed and done as part of the project. So you have all of your standard normal sort of design documents and testing, etc. But then you have all of the the GXP specific sort of validation requirements there, and there's lots of SOPs that have to be produced, and and what that actually does is the impact of that is that the change journey is typically much longer than other sectors. So there's defining those requirements and helping to deliver things first time. It's absolutely essential, because, as I say, the change within the pharma organization takes a lot longer than it does in other sectors.
Yeah, and something else that I think worth calling out around this is, we see across all industries and all sectors an increasing use of third-party organizations, and that can be as simple as an outsourcing arrangement. But there are specific challenges that we see faced by pharmaceutical organizations as well. And, looking at things like clinical research organizations and those partnerships that are established, which ultimately are around people who don't work for your organization having access to some of that data. And that in itself adds an additional set of risk and an additional set of requirements around how those can be managed.
Yeah, absolutely. And talking about data, if you look at the sensitivity of the types of data that pharmaceutical companies have, they have the race for the vaccines, for example. So really protecting that IP, protecting that data, people's sensitive data. You have clinical trials, you have lots of data that is absolutely essential to protect. If you look at the statistic that's on the screen there, that there's the incidence on healthcare is up 44% in the year, and a lot of that is the high profile, the high value of getting that data out of pharma companies as well. So protecting that is absolutely an essential part. I'm not saying that other sectors don't have to protect their data, of course they do, but with the pharmaceutical companies, there that data is much more sort of personal to people, and also can be based on sort of like you have life-threatening ingredients in vaccines and things like that. So the next question would be, what do we kind of mean by digital innovation? And as you can see from the stats, sort of nearly 80% of pharma leaders say, if it's a differentiator for them. But Paul, what's your take on digital innovation?
Yes, I think again we've seen lots of changes, not just in pharmaceutical, but across a range of industries over the past few years. But I think this is starting to impact on pharmaceuticals in a new way. So lots of the aspects that we've seen more widely around digital transformation, and we can see some references here to things like AI and cloud and some of those changes that have been happening. What we're starting to see, and again borne out by the stat that's on there, as this starts to become more of a competitive differentiator, then modern ways of using technology are starting to be deployed more widely. And of course, as soon as you start to change the way that you're using technology, that will have an impact in your threat landscape. Some fairly obvious things of moving data into cloud solutions starts to affect the way that you can secure that and the way that you need to manage any risks about it. So that whole area about the way that research is being done, the whole area around the way that is impacting then on those transformation programs, just naturally leads itself to more of a threat landscape for organizations. And again, these are trends that we've seen across wider industry over the past few years, but I think is becoming much more pertinent to pharmaceuticals. And you touched upon things like the race to vaccines over the last few years. Finding new ways of leveraging technology, new ways of leveraging data, are now starting to become more at the forefront, and that is leading on to these additional risks.
Yeah, absolutely. And just kind of, touching on that, there's some new technologies as well. There's, what we generally see is, within the pharma sector itself, there's lots of mergers and acquisitions and also collaborations as well. So if you think about like Pfizer, for example, so they worked with BioNTech to develop vaccines. You've got therapeutics companies that are all using new technologies, and all these technologies are coming to the forefront, which means they have to share data, they have to collaborate, they have research that has to be passed about. So all of that data, has to be protected. And then also, where a company is, is merging, you then have to manage the identities of that and the systems of the new company as well. So, if the new company, or if they're, splitting off, and, as some companies have done, like on the consumer health side of things, they're splitting their main business away from it. So, there's all of these things going on. So you've got all these elements of business change while you're trying to protect this highly sensitive, commercially sensitive data, and making sure that people have only got access to what it is that they need access to, and also helping them to trust the third parties, and giving access to a third party company is obviously one of the challenges that we see them have to overcome.
Yeah, just to follow up on something, I kind of touched upon this before, but the increased adoption of technologies, looking at things like that AI aspect and cloud. Again, this is part of what I think is a wider IT trend, and we've referenced the ideas of digital transformation already about this. But I think within the last few years, the adoption of those technologies within pharmaceutical customers has started to accelerate. And for some of the reasons that we discussed before, that regulatory landscape, I think there's been a slowness to move into this, and almost a conservatism around it, which is entirely warranted. But as these technologies start to come to the fore, fairly simple things like data being held in the cloud needs a different type of protection around it, and focusing around the identities of users, and not necessarily thinking this is all behind a firewall and therefore inaccessible to people, starts to become much more important. And I think it's those combination of those trends which really are starting to increase that threat landscape.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you say, the perimeter has changed, right? So it's no longer that you just have to protect the perimeter of the office. Everything's everywhere now, and data's in the cloud, etc. So really, identity is key to protecting that. So, speaking about risks, what do you see as some of the key risks within the sector?
So again, I think there are some specific challenges around that the pharmaceutical industry is facing, and some of the stats on screen are probably indicative of what they are. But let's remember that many of these risks also apply to lots of other organizations as well. And coming back to this idea of that baseline set of challenges that organizations have, and then somewhat escalated by the nature of pharmaceutical operations. I think if you start to look at the operational side of it, and fundamentally we're looking at things like very long development life cycle processes. And that starts to have an impact in the way that deployment change is done, and some of the inherent risks around that. If you're looking at multi-year processes for development of products, and actually a relatively low number of those ever come onto the market, then the risk involved with any kind of security problem in the middle of that are escalated by quite a long period of time. Organizations in other sectors may also have those long development processes, but maybe not quite as data heavy. Maybe they don't have quite the same regulatory challenges around that at all. So every time that we're looking at these types of situations, and you look at the length of time it takes to respond to and even detect those breaches, combined with the likelihood of that happening, and what we're seeing is an increased set of targeting against pharmaceutical industries and healthcare and some other businesses as well, actually mean that there's a much greater impact in any of those problems throughout that process. And coming back to that, everything that you're working on, only about 1 in 10 of those products are ever going to come through to market, which means that you're escalating the potential challenges from any problem within that. And again, combined with that stat there around the length of time taken to detect means any problems, it's going to be a long time before you actually find it, with then that outsized impact across it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We were speaking to our clients, and they were talking about some of the risks that they have to kind of mitigate against. But and interesting conversations that they were saying, well, consider this as a risk. That when people normally, if they get breached and a threat actor gets into the systems, what is the potential damage that they can do? And if you think about, in a COVID world or before that, but on creating vaccines, if you think about the manufacturing process, the vaccines are produced en masse, and they're produced from an ingredients list, if you like, and this is these are the ingredients that go into a particular vaccine, and they go into that in particular quantities. If somebody was to breach one of those systems and they change the quantities, then you've obviously got like a potential threat to life there as well. So when you think of the impact that could have on on the sort of general public as well, it's absolutely essential to control these systems. And that's why in other sectors you're looking at basically the IT systems and protecting access and protecting data, whereas in the pharma sector you've got the operational technology or the OT systems, which in some cases, you've got lots of legacy systems out there, old versions of OSs, because the systems themselves aren't geared up for kind of security by design. The manufacturing equipment, which traditionally doesn't get kept up to date as much as like SaaS products, etc. So you have to protect these critical business systems. Sometimes there are even air gaps within lab equipment as well. So there's unique challenges within the sector that's specific to that, but it's just as critical to the business. And if any breaches such as these, that could result in sort of reputational damage, bad publicity to the organisation. But much more likely is that it would have outages, which means a hit to the bottom line. Production of life-saving drugs could have an impact. There could be delays in the manufacturing process as well. So all of these things are a risk to the organisation that you have to help mitigate against.
Yeah, I think you raised some interesting points there. One of the things that starts to spring to mind is that range of different technologies and the range of things which are in there, legacy systems, and obviously combined with that, the concepts of transformation that we discussed previously. All of this starts to point towards access actually being a much more important thing to control. And I think what we see around this is that failure to control that. You mentioned things like reputational damage, but there are potentially worse impacts from all of that as well. And fundamentally, this starts to have an impact on shareholder value. We've seen situations where incidents actually lead to a loss of value, and if those are done in a repeated way, aside from that lack of confidence, there could be that knock-on effect around that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is some of the reasoning behind the fact it's a highly regulated industry, and there's compliance requirements heavily that have to be complied with, and that takes up so much time and effort to comply with that. So anything that we do as well, we have to look at increasing the efficiencies in how those compliance activities take, and we need to also improve the security and reduce the risk to the organisation. And if you think about those 3 points, that's seen then as a massive benefit to the organisation, because taking time to anything you can do to reduce the any compliance activities takes time away from the general business of the company anyway. So, yeah. Right. Moving on then. So,
right. So I spoke. Great, thanks, Chris. I spoke at the beginning in the introduction around this idea of IGA, and obviously the webinar is about this idea. So what I wanted to do was just go through a few of the challenges that we want to be able to overcome with these solutions and get down to what it means and how we go about doing it. So the fundamental things that we're looking at are really around security and risk reduction. It kind of goes without saying, managing access around users is going to have a knock-on impact around both of those things. We've got the security for the sake of security, all the good reasons for doing that, the risk reduction. But obviously within sectors like pharmaceutical, then what we're also looking at is that idea of regulatory compliance, being able to tie down the access around users. Again, that statement I made at the beginning, the right access for the right users at the right time in order to do their jobs. And that then has an impact on the operational efficiency side of things. So if I'm able to do the things that I need to do, when I need to do it, get access to the right systems, that will enable me to do my job in a quicker way. And particularly where we've got lots of people engaging with data or systems access, being able to quickly onboard people, offboard people, again, tying that into those concepts around third parties and some of the other things we mentioned before, is necessarily going to make this improvements around it. So I think when we're talking about IGA, we should always be looking at these three different elements and the impact we can have on across those. So again, if we start to think about IGA, and it's a slightly odd term, and we use it as an organization. We also use identity security. So I just want to be super clear about what we actually mean by this. And there are a few different disciplines, and I'll get into the details of these very shortly. But starting to think about this idea of identity management, how do we understand around who the users are, make sure that we're able to get them the access that they need when they need it and remove it when they don't. So those concepts around lifecycle management, but combined with those more traditional identity governance or compliance manager disciplines, looking at things like, is this access appropriate for the user at this time? And it's this set of activities that we bring within this banner of, whether we call it IGA, identity security, kind of mean the same things, but these are the kind of concepts we're talking about. Now, if we get into a little bit more detail around this, there are some key concepts. What we generally see is organizations leveraging different aspects of technology in order to accomplish those goals. So we've spoken a little bit about that idea of identity lifecycle, understanding who the users are, making sure that when they join the organization, they have the right access, making sure that when they leave, it all gets removed, making sure that those changes that happen during the necessarily life cycle of a user are reflected. If I change jobs, I should gain some new access, I should lose some others. But we see this working alongside this idea of an access review, and you'll see this terminology, review, sometimes certifications, sometimes access attestations. Very similar ideas, but ultimately around providing a framework for somebody to take a decision around access. Is it right for this user at this time to have this access? Providing the set of capability to do that, audit the decision, and then ultimately remove the access if it was determined to be no longer applicable for that particular user. And this is one of the key controls that we see for most organizations in those ideas around auditing and compliance. I think the next bit's not building out, Chris, so if you can just skip that one for me. So the next bit is really then the flip side of that of, we've spoken about getting rid of access for users where it's no longer applicable. But in some situations, users might need more access. Maybe I'm doing something for short-term cover. Maybe I've adopted some new capability or new functions of my job for a short period of time. So allowing a framework for users to request access to something new, put in place a governance process around that, sets of approvals, making sure that it goes through that process with the right level of auditing and control, and ultimately then delivering that access to that user in a rapid way so that they can get on with their jobs. Again, that idea of efficiency comes into that. And then the final concept is that of separation of duties. Almost every organization, but particularly in pharmaceutical sector, has sets of controls around what type of users should be able to perform which activities. Sometimes that's done at a high level. People in this particular set of business unit shouldn't be able to access these systems. Sometimes it's a little bit more granular than that, and we look at those cases of you shouldn't be able to both approve something and request something within that same system. So we see these as being the core sets of capabilities around an IGA or identity security solution. And of course, all of these are applicable at various times for all of our customers, but particularly within the pharmaceutical industry.
Cool. Brilliant. Thank you very much, Paul. So I guess in summary, it's kind of coming to the end of the webinar now, but what we've done is we've discussed that pharma is a highly regulated industry. It's got GXP, SOX, soon to be UK SOX, GDPR, and many other regulations to comply with. And it needs to be agile and adaptable, both for its workforce, its consumers, its third party, its customers, and be able to adopt mergers and acquisitions easily and quickly. And the organisations need to be able to provide as Paul says, the right access at the right time for the right reasons. It needs to be doing all of this while protecting its essential data, information, and business processes across both its IT and OT landscape, and that being both premise and in the cloud. And all of this needs to happen without compromising productivity. In fact, by implementing an IGA solution, it should not only improve productivity, but it also should reduce costs through the automation that Paul just talked us through. And also, it must provide a much better user experience, because ultimately, if users find it easy to use, then they will more often adopt that. And then this allows the pharma companies to do what they do best, which is develop medicines, provide services, and get them to market quicker and with reduce risks and issues throughout the product life cycle. So I think what we'd like to do now, as we come to the end, is just take any questions. I'm not sure if there's any questions, Paul. We're nearly running out of time, so.
I'm not seeing any at the moment, but if we just give a moment, if there are any questions out there, you can use the Q&A option, and we can try to address those. And if we start to run out of time, then we can take them offline and get back to you later.
Yeah, cool. Excellent. Well, I guess if there's nothing coming in, then I guess as if you do have any questions, we can reach out to us later. Not a problem. But yeah, I'd just like to say thanks everyone for tuning in. I'd like to say thanks to Paul from SailPoint for joining me today. If you do have any questions about anything you've heard, then please do reach out. And just a reminder that the accompanying report is available on our website, and the recording will be available offline and be distributed in case you missed anything. If there's anything that you want to have a follow-up session with us, then please do reach out. But thanks very much for listening. We hope you enjoy this session, and have a wonderful rest of the day.